Let me check. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to A Girl in Love with Tech podcast. My name is Rachel Rabo. I'm a Microsoft MVP, a Power Platform, and a Dynamics 365 CRM developer. This podcast is streamed live on my LinkedIn profile and also on YouTube. And you can find the recording on YouTube, LinkedIn. You can also find it on Audible, and I've forgotten so many places that it is because Google Podcast is no longer available anymore. But just search for A Girl in Love with Tech podcast, and you see me everywhere. And our special guest for today is Brent. I got that right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm going to be continuing the series we have on AI ethics, implementation, and adoption. And our special guest for today is going to talking about ethical AI, data science, and enterprise solution. So, hi, Brent, if you can introduce yourself.
Hello, Rachel. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Brent Dawson. I'm originally from Canada. I have been a resident of the UK for the last 4 years. I actually moved right in the middle of the pandemic in 2021, which was the perfect time to do it because nobody else was. So it was great. The plane that I flew from Canada to London was basically empty. So I had the back half of the plane all to myself.
Yeah.
Currently, I'm actually in Bucharest as we speak. I spend about half my time here and half my time in London. I have my own consulting company, so I do consulting all over Europe and North America. And my fiance is Romanian, so I kind of like spending time with her. So I'm spending some time with her here in
Yeah.
Bucharest. So hopefully one of these days we'll figure out where we want to live. Hopefully somewhere warm. But yeah,
Yeah.
so it's
And
glad to be here.
yes, that's awesome. And you can even add Malta to your bucket list of places to live in because Malta is not too
Malta's
hot
on my
and it's not too
list.
cold.
Spain is on my list. Turkey,
Yeah.
India, the whole world.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's definitely awesome. Okay, so thank you so much. And I'm just going to go ahead to our first question.
Sure.
So if you're listening to this podcast, please let us know where you're joining us from, and you can connect with Brent on LinkedIn. So connect with him on LinkedIn. So the first question I have to ask, like we're talking about, especially with your background,
Hmm.
and thank you so much. We connected on Trends when
Yes.
I asked, I'm currently doing this series. Is anybody interested to talk about AI adoption, ethics, and data science? So thank you so much for accepting my invitation.
No worries. Well, it's. I just finished my master's in data sciences, and I'm about to start my PhD in ethics and AI. So I
Yeah,
figured, that's kind of an interesting topic to talk about. So
yes, it's definitely interesting. Yeah, thank you. Especially with the world we have right now, like everything is
no,
AI trending in different industries and
yeah.
everything. Everybody's using it, not just in an organization or company. People are using it personally. So it's
And it's
definitely something.
difficult. It's difficult to know these days because the technologies are getting so much better. What
Yeah.
is real and what isn't? Um,
Yes.
I'm
True.
beginning to think that probably half, if not more, of Instagram is all AI generated. Um,
Yeah.
it's hard to tell. You can sort of tell on still images, but some of the videos
Yeah.
that you watch, it's pretty hard to tell sometimes. You got to look for
Yeah.
some very specific things, but it's getting difficult, even more so, especially with
Yes.
deep fakes and some of these other things, to figure out exactly what is and what isn't real.
Yeah.
And for
True.
the average person who doesn't deal with this stuff on a regular basis, um,
Yeah. They'll have
it's
no
kind of
idea.
turns the world upside down on them. So,
Yeah. And I think I love something that YouTube did recently. They have a feature if you are uploading a video, you have to select an option that asks you that is this AI authored? Like
right.
is an AI implemented in this video? Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's awesome. Yeah. So I'm just going to go directly to my question. And
Sure.
my first question is that while we're talking about people not, my first question is that while we're talking about people not understanding AI or when they see, because there's so much AI content right now.
Hmm.
So my first question is that how businesses can address ethical AI.
Well, that's a
Yeah.
really big topic.
Yes.
First of all, the biggest thing that we have as a problem, and I'm going to kind of lean towards like generative AI, so the
Okay.
Copilot, ChatGTP way of things. Um, if you think about how a system is built, it's all built on data, right? So if you go back to
Yeah.
the old days of Google, right? And so Google would go out and it would send these spiders out all over the web, and it would collect information from websites and so on.
Yeah.
And then you would have this huge database that you could go ahead and search and find information on. Well, generative AI is much the same way, except the only difference is that generative AI takes all of the information, not just sort of the
Okay.
header information about the website, and records that in a very large database and creates these very large language models.
Yeah.
Part of the problem, though, is that the data that it's using to record and generate these models are all sort of, for the lack of a better term, male oriented. If you think
Okay.
about all of the data that we've had electronically or in recorded history, up
Yeah.
until the 1950s, 1960s, it's been almost entirely male oriented. There's been very little data that's been female generated or references
Yes.
females and that sort of stuff. So by default, just because of the types of data that you have, even before you even attempt to try and do anything to it, you automatically have
Okay.
a built-in bias. And of course, you also
Yes.
then have biases, you know, it's mostly been a Western thing in terms of recorded history and that sort of stuff. So you
Yeah.
automatically also then get biases to regions of the world, or
Yes.
races of the world,
Backgrounds,
and
races.
and
Yeah.
exactly, so like Africa, a lot of African history and a lot of African literature and stuff like that is not
Yeah.
included because it's not as easily maintained, or it's not electronically maintained, or
Yeah.
it's
Or even
as
up to
easily
date
accessible.
too. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
So that bias that's built into these data platforms, whether it's intentional or not, I think is probably the single biggest challenge from an ethical point
Mhm.
of view that everybody has. And it's not just businesses, it's governments, it's end users, it's
Yes.
everybody. And
Yeah.
and so one of the things that needs to happen from my point of view is that when we're building out these models, it's not enough to just consume the information, especially when we're training the models. It's not enough to just consume the information and then use that to produce responses in generative AI, but
Okay.
also we need to do a better job of analyzing that data and then
Yeah.
figuring out how we can, bias is not going to be something that we can completely get rid of ever. It's just the way, the nature of the information that we have.
Yeah.
But if we can do a better job of of sorting that information out so that we don't automatically exclude females, genders,
Yes. Bias.
societies,
Yeah.
whatever, that
Yeah.
that whole bias, is going to be an issue. And so that's, I think, the single biggest thing that we need to work on as AI professionals, is trying to
Yeah.
figure out how to get rid of those gender and cultural biases in AI. And I think that's the biggest challenge that AI faces at this point.
Yeah, and I think with everything you just said now, I think there are a lot of persons out there, like they actually have no idea that, because there's this idea I have, is that if anything has an advantage, it definitely has a disadvantage. Like
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, people look at all the advantages that AI has, but they don't really think of, okay, if AI has so many advantages where I can use it easily in my day to day, I can plan my day, I can draft an email, I can use it to increase productivity. So in what ways are the disadvantages? And with you just mentioning about bias, about
Hmm.
different things, especially for companies and businesses who are planning to implement it into their business, or even personalized use. There are some things on AI where people use AI and they post false information. I don't know if you have seen it, especially on Twitter.
Oh yeah, I mean, like the problem is that it's a
Yeah.
tool that people need to learn how to use.
Yes.
And I've jokingly said for years that there are 3 things that people should have to pass a psych exam before they're allowed to do: get married,
Yeah.
have children, and own a computer. Because the problem is that everybody has this little device in their hand, right? And it's always
Yeah.
with them all the time. And it knows everything about everything from the entire history of the world. And the
Yes.
problem is that until you've actually figured out and learned how to use a tool like that, it's going to have positives and negatives. As an example, if you use a generative AI tool and you go out and say, create for me, XYZ on how to create, the brand new widget, and it comes back and
Okay.
it generates some information for you, and then you take that generative AI response down to the patent office and say, here's my new idea for the next greatest mousetrap. Well, it's
Yeah.
not your idea. You
No.
didn't come up with it. The system,
Yeah.
that information was generated by the system having all of these keywords that it has
And it's
collected
not
from all these
always
different
right
places.
too. One,
No, and
sorry
that's the
for
other thing.
interrupting you. It's not always right. Yeah.
So when I go into places and they say, what's the best way for me to assure that what it's producing for me is correct? Well,
Yeah.
my answer is that you have to understand what it is that you're asking it to do in the first place. If you're
Yeah.
asking the software to come out and write you a Python application on how to do Pythagoras' theorem, well, if you don't understand how Pythagoras' theorem works to begin with, then you've lost half the battle, because you need to know that what the software is producing for you is logical, it works, it's correct,
Yeah.
and that the answers that it's going to provide to you are what they should be providing, right? And so what
Yeah.
ends up happening is that, and I teach this all the time, is that people will go in and they'll ask a question and it'll spit out an answer and they'll go, okay, great, that's it, done, copy, paste, put it in
Yeah.
my document, and off it goes. Well, did you read it? Did you spell check it?
Mm-mm.
Did you validate it for accuracy? Did you check it for names that are different than your, all of
Yeah.
these things? And they just kind of stare at you and go, well, I didn't know I had to do that. And it's like, well, it's a computer. Anything that relies on human reliability is unreliable, right? A
Yes.
computer in and of itself is not a reliable tool. It's only based on the input that it gets and the configuration of the data that it has to generate the output for you. And so, it's an educational thing as well. I mean, I've seen
Yeah.
and read of scenarios where people have asked questions. Lawyers have asked it to generate a submission for a case, and they
Wow.
got
Yeah.
copy and
I
pasted
think
it.
yes. I've seen a lot of people when they talk about them using AI for law, like lawyers, they use AI.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, continue. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's been lawyers where they've asked the question to the system, it's generated an output, they've copied and pasted it, they've not edited it, they've not
Yeah.
validated it, nothing, submitted it to the court, and then when the
That's
court
bad.
looks at it, the judge looks at it and goes, well, this isn't you, and this is a different case, and blah blah blah. I mean, I know of one lawyer. Well, I've read of one lawyer who actually lost his bar license in the U.S. because he just copied and pasted what the system generated for him. He thought, okay,
Yeah.
I'm done, and then submitted it to the court. And 6 months later, he's now lost his law license. So I
Wow.
I mean,
And
I talk to a lot of places, and I teach them that you don't own the output, it's not yours. you
yes.
have to you have to specifically say somewhere in there, I generated this with using generative AI, and therefore
Yeah.
I don't own the copyright for this. And the second thing is that you need to do it multiple times, you need to do several iterations, and
Check.
you have to validate that
Yeah.
it's correct.
Yes,
So
and something you mentioned, you always need to know what the topic you are searching for. If you're talking about building a game, if you're talking about a case, you need to understand what this topic is based on so that when it gives you an output, you actually know what to look for. When
yeah.
you read through it, you will understand that, okay, this is not correct.
Hmm.
This part of the output being given to me is not correct. And one thing too about AI is that most times it gives you outdated information.
Hmm. Potentially, yeah, it depends on what it is that you're asking and how
Yes.
you're asking, because of course writing the prompt
Yeah,
the
true.
correct way is making a huge
Depending on your
difference.
prompt.
but but you're correct. I mean, the data is only as accurate as the last time it was trained. And
Yes.
some of these large language models, like if you look at OpenAI, there's so much data in there, and they're so massive that that it's
Yeah.
hard to reconfigure and recalculate them on a regular basis because there's just so much stuff there
Yeah.
that it becomes a challenge to try and organize it. And and that's also, I guess, part of the whole
Yeah.
challenge that organizations are going to have, is trying to make sure that it's organized in a proper method.
Yeah, and I have another question to ask you, especially when it concerns organizations and businesses. How can they bring in ethical guidelines into their development and deployment processes for AI?
um, so the big thing is they need to understand, or somebody in their organization needs to understand, copyright.
Okay.
And that's probably the biggest thing right now from an ethical point of view that organizations need to do. Um,
Yeah.
so as I was saying previously, you need to understand that you didn't create that. The system
Okay.
generated it. It's not
Yeah.
your original idea, right? It's a conglomeration of other original ideas that other people have had.
Yes.
And so I
Yeah.
think having an understanding of what is legal and what is required to stay legal on the copyright sort of things, and literally being honest about it. I mean, it's basically in the honor system at this point.
Yeah.
You have to have a bit of personal ethics as well, and a little bit of morality to be able to say, that I did that. And the other thing is too, is I think you need to do, from an end user point of view, or from an organizational point of view, you need to validate and verify the data sources that you're using for generative AI. So if
Okay.
you're using the language models that are provided by an OpenAI or a Google or other ones that are producing these large models that are available, um, you know, you can generally rely that the data sources for them are pretty solid, right? They're
Okay.
not going to, Microsoft has the responsible AI, uh,
Yes, they
uh,
do.
you know, pathology, methodology, whatever you want to refer to it. So, if you're sticking to that, you understand that it helps to make sure that the types of data that you're getting out of there are at least somewhat correct, right? Because
Yeah.
Microsoft is taking it upon themselves to create the strategy to make sure that the data usage and that the AI data that it's generating is not going to be harmful, and then it's going to be,
Yeah.
it's going to be more or less correct. It's going to be outdated. Everything, I mean,
Yes.
you do something now, 10 seconds from now, it's outdated anyway. But, so I mean, they're at least trying, and other organizations do as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I get a little bit leery when I look at things like websites that say, "Oh, if you upload 3 pictures, we'll create an avatar of you, and you can use it on your LinkedIn and this and that." But what people don't
Yes.
do is read the fine print to say that, "Oh, by the way, once we generate this AI avatar, we own it. You don't." Right? So
Yeah.
you don't actually own the digital version of yourself. It's owned by the company that actually made the app.
Yeah.
And
And
then,
sorry, I want to interrupt you here. I think there's something they always say. I've forgotten the way they put the statement, but they said if you want to hide something from someone, put it in writing.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Put it in
Yeah.
writing. Nobody cares. I mean,
Yeah.
I do seminars all the time, and one of the first questions I ask is, how many people in here have actually read a license agreement?
Yeah.
And if you got 200 people in a room, you might get 3 hands. And the only reason those 3 hands went up is because that's part of their job before they could
Yeah.
validate whether the app can be installed. But I mean, like,
Yeah.
you probably do it too. Oh, look, there's a really cool game. Let's go play that. It's like click. It's like, oh, well, geez. Oh, geez. And that's how things like the collection of information that Cambridge Analytica did in the first Trump presidency and then Brexit and stuff
Okay.
like that, is that Russians created a game that got access to your device and Facebook,
Yeah.
and people went and did this quiz, and it's like, oh, this is really cool. And the next thing you know, they have everybody's information, right? And
Wow.
so
Yeah.
it's again, this is one of those knowledge things where people just need to understand that if it's free, chances are there's something wrong with it, right?
Yeah.
You got
They're
to be
sort
a
of
little
getting
bit wary.
something from it. Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
so I mean, even with the Microsoft stuff, sure, you can use Copilot in Bing, but
Yeah.
you know, if you pay for it, you're going to get a much better, much more reliable version of it than if you're getting it for nothing, right? So, which
Yeah.
is why that new one that's coming out of China makes me, leery. It all sounds really good, but as things
And
have
it's
gone on,
free, so yeah, it's kind of, yeah,
you
there's
start reading
definitely
about
something there.
you start
Yeah.
reading about the data leaks and the inaccuracies, and it's like, maybe it's not as great as everybody thought it was at the start, right? So,
Yeah.
so again, if you're not technically inclined, you're not going to know that. You're just going to go, oh, this is a really cool app. I like it. It makes my life easier. And the next thing you know, your bank account's drained, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Sure. A lot of people, like you just mentioned, it's apart from even AI itself, before you use an application or before you use a tool, they have or when you're creating an account, they're going to ask you a question. Do you agree to this
yeah,
service? Do you agree to this service or any other thing they have written there? So
yeah,
instead of just clicking on yes, try reading through it to see
yeah.
what
It,
it
it,
is. Yeah.
exactly. And the thing is that like with these agreements and with these
Yeah.
apps, people just assume that everybody is looking out for their. Well, it's on Facebook, it must be safe, right?
Yeah.
And while Facebook is reputable, it's used by billions of people all over the world. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
but I mean that doesn't mean anything, right? So yeah,
Yes. Yeah, and the next question I have to ask you is that as AI tools become more integrated into decision making, how do we ensure transparency and accountability for automated outcomes?
well, um, the free speech types are not going to like this answer, but we need government regulations.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned before, Microsoft has the responsible AI strategy that helps to make sure that the data is responsible. The EU is bringing in a number of different regulations that directly structure how generative AI is implemented and used by
Yeah.
organizations and companies that fall under the premise of the European Union. The United States did have that, but unfortunately, the current president has executive
Yeah, so
ordered
remove
that
this.
away.
Yeah.
But basically, what it comes down to is that countries need to bring in laws to help regulate these tools. Much like they regulate water, they regulate electricity, they regulate a lot of
Yes.
other things. The gung ho free speech types are not going to like it, but that's the only way, or one of the few ways, that we can start down the road of making sure that these tools are transparent and accountable. And
Yeah.
and you can't just rely on the machine being honest. You have to make sure that the people that are using it and creating it are
Yes.
creating it for honest purposes, right? So,
Yeah.
there's always going to be, you can sign an agreement with the UN, and there's always going to be rogue actors out there that will skirt the rules and whatever. But
Yeah.
that you deal with them on the one-off basis. But it's definitely something that governments definitely need to be involved into, and the courts too. I mean, as with
Yeah.
every technological advance, the laws and the courts are always 5 steps behind. And
Yes.
by the time they get caught up, the cat's out of the bag, and it's definitely difficult. It's hard to, as they say, it's hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube after it's squeezed out. And so
Yeah.
that's one of the things that needs to happen on a more frequent basis.
Yeah, and when it comes to organizations, actually, like the companies actually creating these AI services, they need to make sure that throughout the development process of this, they need to make sure that throughout the development process of these AI services, they need to make sure that it is fair. They
Yep.
need to make sure that it is responsible. They need to go through all the different process. Like apart from AI itself, when it comes to normal development, a lot of people they look a lot of things outside, like they don't really think about them. When you
Yep.
talk about when you talk about building an application, you have to think about the performance of the app. Is it working
Hmm.
well? Does it get to a point and then because of the app the phone is very hot? Does it
Yep.
affect anything? People don't just think about that. They just think about, okay, I'm building this app and that is all.
Yeah. Exactly. And so, as I say, that the government regulation, the EU
Yeah.
is trying to, the EU is trying to look out for people, for the normal user, without trying to stifle innovation. And of course, that's a very tight balancing act to to work with. But I think in the long run, the safety of the individual that's using that application should take precedence over the innovation of the application itself, because
Yes.
as you say, going through that whole development life cycle, people need to know that it's actually going to be okay to use it, and unfortunately, a lot of times that's a little late in the game to start implementing that. But we need to start doing it.
Yeah, and also be transparent about the use of the AI service. Like,
Oh,
don't just talk
absolutely. Yep.
about, yeah, like don't just give us the basics of what we can use that AI service to do. Tell us everything. Be
Yep.
transparent about it. Don't
Yep.
hide anything. Yeah.
And that's why I say, like, sticking to reputable providers like a Microsoft and a Google and so forth will help
Yeah.
in that, because they have very large business reputations with very large, public share offerings that could literally
Yeah.
tank them, out of business in no time if they don't, if they aren't open about their things.
Yeah, and I have my next question, especially when it comes to adoption of AI, because a lot of organizations, at least maybe now it's getting better, but a lot of organizations are against adopting AI, or a lot of
Mm-hmm.
industries, they are against adopting AI. So what are the challenges of adopting AI in industries like retail, manufacturing, and transportations? And how can organizations address these challenges? Yeah.
AI is pretty much everywhere, whether you know it or not. AI is
Yep.
there, right?
Yes.
If you take a Microsoft exam and you're proctored online, there's an AI bot watching you on your camera. The
Yeah.
proctor on the exam, he's not watching 600 people. There's an
Yeah.
AI app that watches you, and if it does certain things and it detects it, it notifies the proctor that you're cheating.
Okay.
And so AI is in everything. It's in your toaster. It's in your refrigerator. It's
Your
in your
fridge.
car. It's What's that?
I
What's
said
that?
it's in your fridge.
It's in your fridge. People that
Yeah.
buy the ones that have the cameras on it. So when you're at the
Yes.
grocery store, you can look in your fridge and go, "Oh, I need milk." It's like, okay.
Yeah.
um, you know, and so again, as I say, just about everything that's being produced nowadays has some form of AI in it, or in it, whether it's been generated by using AI to help create the patent for it or whatever, or that it contains AI and IoT in it by default. And an example now, there's a technology that's using AI, and it's kind of scary when you think about it, so
Okay.
that a store can do individual pricing. So as an example, if you go into a grocery store and you
Yeah.
look on the shelf and it says it's £4.65 for a bottle of Coca-Cola or something like that,
Yeah.
but you shop at that store more often, they might
Yes.
offer you the bottle at £3.99, but only you. And so
Oh.
when you walk up to the shelf can detect you and say, "Oh, that's
Yeah.
Brent. He buys here all the time. I'm going to lower the price for him." Or, "Oh, Rachel only shops here once every 6 months. I'm going to increase the price by 5%." And it
That's
literally
very.
can change. It can
Yeah.
change the prices on products for each individual person every time they go to that product. So
Yeah.
whether they buying it whether that's on the shelf price, which is becoming much more difficult, but
Yeah.
chances are when you go to the till, and the till is going to ask who you are, and if you're in the system, it's going to, okay. And so as you swipe it, it's going to come up with the price, and it could be a different price for every person, or it could be
Yeah.
a different price for a certain part of the day, right?
Yeah.
And it could be the
That's.
same thing whether you're in the grocery store, the gas
Yeah.
station, wherever it happens to be. And so, so it's not so necessarily much on the organization. Sort of retail can take full advantage of it.
Yeah.
But in manufacturing, like if you use AI, you can use AI to help you model out a new valve or widget or whatever, right? In transportation, you can use AI to help you with road safety. So
Yeah.
as I say, because it's involved everywhere,
Yeah.
every type of industry has different advantages and disadvantages of using the technology. From my point of view, right now, if you're an organization that does not or has not considered the use of AI in your organization in one form or another, you're
Yeah.
immediately behind the eight ball, because
Definitely.
you,
That is true.
you
Yes.
need to take advantage of it, because if you're not doing it, sure as heck, there is a competitor of yours who is already way ahead of you, and
Yeah.
you'll never catch up to them, right? And so, but again, another part of this is government regulation, right?
Yeah. Sure.
And making
Very much
sure
so.
that especially from the retail side, where I was using that example of automated pricing. You need to have a way of saying, look, you can't increase prices by 60% just because this person doesn't
Yes.
shop here all the time. And so, so that's a challenge. But I think the
Yeah.
biggest challenge is for most organizations is just figuring out the best way to use it in their organization,
Yeah.
depending upon the type of organization, and then just going forward with it. Because if they don't do it, um, they're not gonna be around long.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have a next question to ask you. Like I've been asking the speakers I've been having in this series, this AI series, and it's concerning data.
Yeah.
Like especially for organizations who do not already, they have not adopted AI yet to their
Hmm.
organization, and they are thinking of, okay, we want to adopt AI, but we do not know what to do. So what do you
Yeah.
think is the importance of a well organized data? Like why do you think it is important to
Okay.
organization?
So there's
Yeah.
there's two things that I'm going to say about that. First of all,
Yeah.
data is what drives AI, right?
Yes.
If you don't have data, AI doesn't exist, especially on the
Yeah.
generative AI side. But AI in general doesn't exist if you don't have data. And bad data gives you bad results.
Yeah.
So, if you're in an organization and you're going to start going down the AI road, you need to have somebody in your organization who understands data, whether they're a data engineer or somebody who's been a data analyst or a database person. Somebody needs to understand how data works. And without that, you're automatically behind the eight ball, because that is how you're going to take full advantage of these technologies. And the other thing that's important is that, and it's sort of a combination of data and the people, but
Okay.
AI's a tool, and it
Yeah.
shouldn't be there to replace the users, right? You should
Yeah.
never do a technology application deployment as a way to get rid of your staff. And
Okay.
the staff
Yeah.
are the people that make the data work. So if you
Yes.
don't have the staff, you don't know where the data is, you don't know how to use it, you don't know how to collate it, you don't know how to combine it, and therefore you don't know how the data is going to produce, or what the data is going to produce for you.
Yeah.
And so a lot of organizations have this idea that, well, I can bring in generative AI and I can replace, 10% of my staff. I mean,
Yeah. And I
Facebook
wait,
has already
sorry.
announced, I was
Wait,
going to
sorry.
say
And there's
Facebook,
something I just want to mention. Hi, Brent. Sorry.
it's
Especially
okay.
when it comes to, can you hear me?
Yep.
Especially when it comes to adoption of AI. Sorry for interrupting you. Especially when it comes to adoption of AI, a lot of people are scared. Like they have
Yeah.
this thought that AI is going to take my job. So imagine a company bringing AI in, and then they have this thought that, okay, when we bring AI, we are going to replace them
Hmm.
with with the employees we already have. So if you're a company or an organization and you are planning to bring in AI or to adopt AI, try to let your employees know that we are bringing this AI to increase your productivity and not to replace you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
um, history has shown that if an employee thinks that something's going to replace them, they'll resist, right? And
Yes.
so,
Sure.
and the other thing is stop listening to the news and stop watching social media experts.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, the whole world's going to come to an end if we all start using
Yeah.
AI. That's bonkers. It's nonsense, right? It's a
Yeah.
tool, and like any tool, if you use it for what it's designed to do, it will be advantage to you. If you don't, well, then it's going to be a negative to you. But and the other thing is that as an organization, you know, sit the staff down and say, look, here are going to be opportunities for you to change the type of job that you do. You
Yes.
don't necessarily have to stay in the type of job. If you want to learn, how to become a data analyst, or you want to learn how to become a prompt engineer or something of that nature, as an
Yeah.
organization, you should encourage that of your staff, which will make them more accepting of the technology, and therefore make it easier for them to adapt to it. And then if we go back to the data side, making sure that the data that they're feeding into the system is correct and accurate, because you actually have people who understand how this stuff works and what it's supposed to
Yeah.
look like, and then ultimately produce better results.
Yeah, and I have another question, just so that we can shorten the time a bit. Like,
Sure.
what do you think? What do you think AI would be in the next 5 years?
It's either going to be everywhere or
Yeah.
nowhere. And
Okay.
when I say it's going to be everywhere or nowhere, it's up
Yeah.
to us as proprietors of the technology to make sure that we use it the right way.
Yeah.
If we use
True.
it the right way, and we get rid of the bias as much as possible, and we're very straightforward about how we use the technology, there really is no limitations to the way that we can use the technology.
Yeah.
If, on the other hand, we don't get that way, we don't rein in the negatives and whatnot, then I could see it as either people are just going to shun it or governments are going to stop it. You know,
Yes.
so it's literally up to us to decide which direction this is going to go. Personally, I think as a human being, most people will want to keep it around because they can see the advantages in making it easier for their lives.
Yeah.
But, again, it's up to us to basically say, if we use it this way, then, we'll keep it around. Otherwise, it could go the way of the dodo.
Yeah. And
So,
if you're listening, okay. And if you're listening to this podcast, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask your questions in the comment section. I think I've been enjoying the conversation so much that I have not asked anybody who is listening to ask the questions. So if you have any questions, please ask your question. Okay. And is there anything that you want to share concerning ethical AI, data science, and also enterprise implementation?
it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It takes planning. It takes organization, acceptance from the top down. If you can get somebody at the executive level, the CEO, the CFO, whatever, to say, look, this is the direction we're going, and you can get the trust of your staff
Yeah.
that this is going to be a good thing and it's going to make everybody's lives better and less
Yeah.
stressful, less
More
difficult.
productive. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big if. It's a big if, but if it's done correctly, um, it's amazing how much buy-in you'll get from people. If people will feel safe, and if you can make them feel safe, then doing this type of implementation on an enterprise level will be
Yes.
considerably less difficult and will have much better adoption. So I think it's a matter of um, getting the people to realize that this is going to help them a lot,
Yeah.
and but also putting on your own guide rails, making sure that you don't cheat.
Yeah.
As I say, it's still basically more or less the honor system. So, when you produce something, if you say it's mine, then it better be yours. And if you can prove
Yes.
otherwise, then there needs to be consequences. So,
Yeah.
so again, as practitioners of the technology and as users of the technology, it's up to us to make sure that we use it correctly and that it's going to be an
Yeah.
advantage to us.
Yeah. All hands on deck.
Yes, absolutely,
Yeah.
100%, 100%.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much. And that's amazing. So don't forget, you need your data to be organized. You can't just jump into adopting AI in your organization.
Yeah,
So always make sure, think of that before adopting AI and everything you have said also. So thank you so much, Brent. And
you're
thank you
welcome.
very much, everyone, for joining us. And see you in the next podcast.
All right. Good night.
Bye.